All right, let's talk about the 1978 history book, A Distant Mirror, The Calamitous 14th Century by Barbara Tuchman. This is a book that I picked up because of Steve Donahue. He did a book club about it. And Steve Donahue, a great fixture here on YouTube as a book critic who turned YouTuber, uh, when he picked this book, I was like, oh, okay, this is a century that I'm interested in, primarily because of what comes after it. A lot of the chivalric works, a lot of like kind of Don Quixote, a lot of Shakespeare with references to the Hundred-Year War. It's a era that I hear a lot about from other works, but I've never actually kind of gotten the information on it itself. So I was like, well, it's a history book on the 14th century. That sounds kind of dry as dirt. It's like, one of these survey books that's looking at a whole century. It's like, how good can it be? But oh, well, Steve Donahue is recommending it, so it can't be that bad. It must be pretty okay. So I decided, hey, okay, I'll pick it up and read it, and I am so very glad I did, because this is one of these books where it's, yes, Jeezily long, but it really reads really quick and really well. What a well-written book. Barbara Tuchman has such a kind of distinctive, sometimes very sarcastic voice. When she's not afraid of putting her own opinions in there, spicing them in there, little, not like overlaying. So it's like, oh God, I can't see what's happening because this author keeps on wanting to tell me about what's happening, but just enough that it's like, keeps you kind of awake, keeps you kind of like alive to the topic. And it's like, it's one of these centuries where it's like, oh my God, so much happens. This is the start of the Black Death, the plague hitting Europe. When I say this is a history of the 14th century. Of course, it's a history of European 14th century, and with a big focus on France and England, and then a little bit of sort of Italy and various other regions, the Holy Roman Empire, Hungary, all this stuff. But yeah, you get the plague, you get the Hundred Years' War. You get the schism in the church, the Roman Catholic Church. This is when you get, I mean, there's always so many different things that are precursors to the big split of when you go from just Catholic to Catholic and Protestant. This is very much like a lot of the rebellions, a lot of the dissatisfactions with that are going to be like the Protestant Revolution, that are going to be the French Revolution, the explosion of democracies. This is the stagnation that happens before the Renaissance. So it's a really kind of fertile thing, and there's a lot of those themes of like, are we going to have kind of reform to the church? Are we going to have a better political system? They all get like, people try, but at this point, the incumbents crush everything. And by the end of the book, we're back to a sort of simmering status quo until things are going to really explode in kind of the era of kind of the Renaissance, and that era. Tuchman does the kind of the narrative technique. This is very much a popular history. It's not intellectual, a kind of university thing. This is something that's actually meant to be read by other human beings. So she does a really good job of bringing you along, telling you, what people's lives were like back then. She does not assume that you know anything about the 14th century, which is was a very good assumption to make for me. So you get ideas of what it was like to live in this century, what it was like to, what you were believing, like this whole thing of you very much, this is, as a very secular person, just kind of the overwhelming presence and domination of religion, and the corruption of religion, how corrupt the institution of the Roman Catholic Church was at this time. Simony, paying for your sins, all this sort of stuff, was very much in force here. And yeah, it's she uses the narrative technique of picking one guy to kind of follow throughout this, a French, well, kind of French, kind of English noble. He ends up with connections to the English aristocracy as well through marriage. Is uh, Ged, Edouard Coucy. And at first, I was sort of puzzled as like, why are you following this guy? He doesn't seem any much more notable than any of the other people. By the end of it, you realize that he is actually a foil for how terrible his fellows was. He was probably the best of a bad lot in through the book. I said that I came through this book. One of the reasons I came through this book is like I've had this kind of fascination with chivalric works, coming from Don Quixote, which is like, we're now like hundreds of years ahead with Don Quixote, but he in his library, Don Quixote's library, there's all these works of chivalry, and I've been reading some of them, Amadeus of Gaul, various others, Blanc. I can't remember what that one was named, but various works like that. And it's interesting to kind of come back to a time when people proposed that they were actually following chivalric codes like Debussy, Debussy were following chivalric codes, and he actually sort of was, but it really gave you the sense of like, oh yes, you show honor and you follow the rules with your own class, but outside of that, peasants and stuff, you feel free to just butcher them and do whatever the hell you want. And indeed, warfare was just unending misery, whether through taxes or actual kind of brutality upon all the poor bastards who lived under these complete assholes. And you start looking at chivalry as, oh, this is an ideological cover for these people to act really, really terrible, as much as the church is kind of saying like, oh, all this material stuff is terrible. We should only focus on the spiritual, while at the same time, in the complete hypocrisy, enriching themselves, sleeping with women, just all the kind of just horrendous kind of hypocrisy. They talk about the Victorians being hypocritical, but oh my God, the people of medieval time, whether it's the church or it's the nobility, where it's equally as hypocritical. But yeah, he actually serves as kind of a familiar face as well, kind of going through this book. Tchmn does a really good job of, she'll give you grand scope, but then she'll just zoom into like great, just little details, talking about specific things happening in the century. And also just like, I'm stuff like, with marriage, that, love was never a thing about marriage was never a thing about love at this point. You didn't love your wife. That was, you married them for political reasons, at least in the aristocratic section. But she also does zoom in on actual guys who's like, yeah, he actually loved his wife and they had a really good relationship. And it's like, oh, okay, these aren't alien beings as well. She's really good at humanizing the people that she is talking about, who are so very, very far in our past now, or it seems very far in our past. I mean, this whole thing of the book being called A Distant Mirror is that you can really see things reflected in our times in this book. And yes, it was written in 1978 and maybe it was talking about that time, but no, you look at it now and you see the super rich of that time being sort of exempt from the very taxes. What their goals were had nothing to do with actually taking care of other people. And you look at our time now of kind of glorification of rich people, of how taxes are used to prop up their uses, but they don't actually pay taxes themselves. All that stuff seems very familiar. And I mean, the whole thing with the plague, you go, oh, okay, this was serious plague, where we're talking a giant, good hunk of the population died off during this time, and indeed didn't start climbing back out of this thing until like into the 15th century, before the population of Europe actually started reaching back up to the heights that it had been at the start of the 14th century, this disastrous 14th century of war and plague and religious strife. So that's sort of a thing where, we've just gone through, we still are in the midst of a pandemic, those you can feel that, and the fear and the misunderstandings that they had seem very vivid to somebody who lived through the last couple of years now. So a distant mirror really kind of makes sense on that stage. Yeah, just Tuchman is just such an engaging writer. It's definitely one of these people of one of the things I learned about history is it's like, don't go by subject, go by writer. If you can find a writer who can write really well, just follow them. Whatever the subject they're interested in, make yourself interested in that subject, because that is a way to have a real success in reading. So I will most definitely be going back to Barbara Tuchman for more of her books. She had a good long career and did a lot of writing, and I'm gonna find more of those. That would be great. All right. I will leave it there. I've been Jay. More videos later.